Good evening. Welcome to Stories Rock. Things that go bump in the night and other tales that terrify us. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Leah Ruckberg, I'm a producer of Stories Rock, and I'm also your host this evening. I want to thank my husband David for being our videographer. And if you would like to see this show, it will be up on YouTube, and if you want to see any of our past shows, you can also go back and take a look at some of those. Okay, our last teller, Mary Finucane, co-leads the Rochester Veterans Writing Group. She's a grant writer, and she also snuggles her 10-year-old daughter whenever allowed. She is a frequent reader for Stories Rock and was featured in the 2017 cast of Listen to Your Mother. A little known fact about Mary, she has been to Ireland at least a dozen times and always thought she would eventually live there. But I won't let her. Tonight she will read Boo! I put it up there for you. You're taller than I am.
How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
One sun-drenched afternoon, while enjoying the rare quiet in the cozy apartment that I shared with 3 other students, I sat with an open book, a cup of tea, and my gaze out the window. It was fall in New England, which is hard to mess up. Leaves were fluttering to the ground, and several stories below my window a pickup soccer game was taking place. I heard her only briefly. She was in the hallway, keying in, and I knew which roommate this was by the particular clunk of items that were set on the floor of the hall and that bumped against the door as she leaned into unlocking. She was a tennis player and had a practice or a match almost every afternoon. We each had our own rituals and habits. I'd known her long enough to know the routine of her arrival home from practice, followed by the procuring of a snack or a meal. She would unload her racket, her book bag, and athletic bag by her room and head to the kitchen for either a bowl of cereal or a bowl of noodles. And then she'd head to the pantry for some necessary addition. All of this registered in under 2 seconds. It only took me hearing her at the door before I dropped my book and sprang cat-like across the room, sliding into the pantry, pulling the cabinet door closed as far as possible. The apartment door swung open as the pantry door was pulled closed. I held my breath as she dumped her things and moved by me. She moved about the kitchen and I slowly exhaled. I heard her humming as she opened the cupboards and the drawers. I listened to her pull out a bowl, a spoon, or a fork. I heard the hum and the beep of the microwave. Today it was noodles. I breathed shallowly, quietly, a smile spread across my face, and a laugh of mischief threatened escape. She was approaching now. I quickly debated whether to leap forward or stand silently upon her opening the pantry door. The metal food shelves were digging into my back. When she opened the door, I stepped forward with it. But before I could say boo, she was shrieking a blood-curdling scream, dropping something that hit the ground and splashed. Her shriek was terrifying and immediately followed by a sob. "What is wrong with you?" she cried, and then turned and walked toward her room. I stood in place, then bent down to the carpet, picking up the plastic bowl, the dropped fork, the wet noodles splayed all over. I never planned to jump into the pantry. This was the hardest thing to explain. It just happened. It hadn't crossed my mind, and then there I was, jumping out at her, just as she thought she was home alone, safe and about to enjoy some ramen noodles. That was 20 years ago. Last week I stopped at my younger sister's home, and she told me in passing that her 6-year-old son Leo had hidden for several minutes in the basement laundry room as she hummed and folded. When she finished, she picked up the laundry basket, turned around, and out Leo jumped from a dark corner shouting, "Boo!" She screamed, then she yelled, then she started laughing. She told me that his reaction to her reaction was almost identical. Her scream startled him, and then he thought he was in trouble, and then he looked relieved as she laughed. As she caught her breath, he smiled, but he wasn't sure if he was allowed to laugh. "Don't do that," she said, recovering. "But you do it," Leo said. Like the 90s commercial in which a parent lectures their child on the harm of using drugs, only to hear their child retort, "I learned it from watching you, all right." My sister was having a moment not unlike the one I had in college, where what I thought was funny caused another person to fear the pantry in her own home. I know this now, and yet the deliciousness that comes from spotting a really good hiding place coinciding with the perfect moment is so strong. A well-worn neural pathway, it has taken years to resist the impulse to crouch behind doors, in closets, and dive under furniture every time I hear someone approaching a room. That's just not a normal thing to do, my roommate later said when she had calmed down and we were talking again. Like, if I hear you come home from class, my thought is I'm happy to see you, and yours is to crouch like a ninja and make me wet myself. I can't live like this. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Those first years living with people who were not the ones I'd grown up with were like moving through a house of fun mirrors. In my house growing up, it was not uncommon to walk through a doorway and have a human body fall directly in front of me, descending from the place they had wedged themselves at the top of the door frame. Sometimes I was startled, other times I just stepped around. Door frame scaring belonged to my younger brother, whose gifts included scaling things, climbing things, and jumping out of things. He could hold his body at the top of a door frame for several minutes, and would hover there quietly until someone walked through it. Another place he would hover was the laundry chute. Once my mother opened the small door that led to the chute, and there was his head, perfectly poised atop his neck, which was bulging from the spider-like position that he maintained. My mother screamed, and he released into a pencil drop down the chute to the basement into a pile of dirty laundry he had prepared for soft landing. His victorious laugh floated up as my mother leaned against the wall, clutching a dirty tablecloth to her chest. Having scaled the chute from the basement to the first floor, he sought greater challenges. We could sometimes hear him grunting in the wall as he aimed to scale all the way to the second floor, where the chute opened up into a bathroom. My mother had her own skills, though, different from those of my brother. Her specialty involved placing things. A realistic-looking mouse atop your pillow, or a lifelike mannequin at the top of a dark staircase. But not the whole mannequin, just the upper body, the torso and above, vacant eyes staring out from a wig tilted just so upon a bald head. I was a recipient of this one, moving up the staircase to the attic bedroom that I shared with my sister. The lights were out, and when I flipped the switch, I met this nameless half-person, her arm fashionably poised to display the latest trend. She would have had her hand on her hip, except she had no hip and no legs. I shrieked and crumpled, and behind me could hear another sound. My mother had been waiting, like Leo, in a dark corner to see who would go up to the attic. She was laughing so hard in the silent and surprised way that take over when a scare has gone well beyond what you might imagine, and into a place where you are both elated with the result and fearful of the response from the rest. It was a crying laughter, but she stayed in the corner, unsure of what I would do. All 7 of us participated in this because there was no opt-out option. You could choose not to frighten others, but it did not grant you immunity. Most of the scares were those of opportunity, without a specific target in mind. It did not matter who opened the laundry chute or walked through the door. It didn't matter who went up the darkened staircase to meet the torso. It only mattered that it be someone. There were no time restrictions, and no location was off limits. Door frames and laundry chutes were for specific talent, but all of us took turns standing very straight and very still in a corner just outside the bathroom on the 2nd floor. This corner was far more frequently occupied than unoccupied by someone waiting to scare the shit out of someone in the bathroom. I spent hours of my life in statue still form while listening to the shower, the toilet, the sink, along with shaving, humming, flushing, flossing, drying, and other bathroom noises. All for the brief thrill of jumping out as someone exited the loo. It became the go-to lazy person scare, and my habitual response to exiting that bathroom was to open the door with one hand and simultaneously feel toward the corner with the other, disrupting the surprise by patting the person in a quick tactile identification. Invisible points in an endless game were garnered when you could let the scarer know that you were A, not scared, and B, knew they were there the whole time. My older sister, with whom I shared a room, had her own specialty. Our old home had roller shades on the bedroom windows, and in our shared bedroom, they were wound particularly tightly. We shared a double bed, and my sister would wait until I was asleep or about to fall asleep. She would slip from her side of the bed with quiet precision. Commando crawling, she dragged herself under the bed toward my side, toward my shade pulled down tight. As I slumbered, her arm would silently stretch until her fingers reached just far enough to give a quick tug. I never got to see how quickly and quietly she pulled the shade. I only experienced the effect, which was akin to a gunshot going off beside my head. When I was younger, I would bolt up in bed and look toward the window and then look to my sister for guidance, but her side of the bed would be empty. Repetition did not lessen the impact. When I got older and brassier, I would talk to her wherever she was in the room. "I know it's you," I'd say, trying to sound bored, and as though I had no desire to ever sleep again. "So dumb, you do the same thing every time," I'd mutter, trying to still my ragged breath. Sometimes I would even work up the courage to get out of bed and drop down to see her, but as my bare foot hit the floor, her hand would grip my ankle Freddy style, releasing the scream that I'd managed to hold back until then. Afterwards, she would settle in, lulled to sleep from the vigorous output of energy, and I would lie awake for ages with adrenaline and cortisol coursing through my body. My own scaring style leaned towards spontaneity and opportunity-based. I could go from reading to suddenly clearing couches or silently dropping behind a door in a fraction of a second, all because I heard someone approaching. When my roommate asked me a very difficult question, why? The only truthful answer that came to mind did not seem wise to say. Honestly confessing, I wanted to scare the shit out of you, was not going to increase her comprehension. Further confusing was the fact that I only did this to people I lived with and genuinely cared about. It requires a level of deep comfort to hide and leap out at another human. You don't do it with just anyone, and definitely not with strangers. My younger sister, whose scaring style I don't even recall, perhaps because she was the youngest and all the good scares were taken, still held enough of this habit that it had been passed on to her 6-year-old son. Only after he frightened her into dropping freshly folded basket of laundry did she find the need to reevaluate and implement a new household policy. No scaring. She said it's been hard for Leo, and he's relapsed 2 or 3 times. He claimed it was unintentional. I believe him. Habits can be hard to break, but the threat of a week without Legos seems to have cured him for good. By the time my child was born, I had learned that there are many other options when faced with the decision of what to do when someone approaches the room you're in. Her life grew and developed without intermittent shrieks followed by hysterical laughter. It would seem a tradition not handed down would become dormant and die, and yet, one day when she was 6, she was busy tending to her many babies in our living room. I went upstairs for a few minutes, and when I came down, her babies were there, but she was not. She was also not in the kitchen, the hallway, or any room on the first floor. She was not in the backyard or the garage or the basement. She was not in any room upstairs. I checked 3 times. I then checked outside again and called for her. I went to our neighbor's house and then the other neighbors, both of whom had children she sometimes played with. Terrified now, I ran home calling her name the entire time. I called for her again in the house and went toward the phone. When my hand touched the receiver, I heard a giggle. My heart was pounding. I stood very still and turned very slowly. The giggle was coming from behind a couch. My daughter crawled out looking very pleased with herself. Had I looked behind the couch? I'm not sure if it crossed my mind. She had never hidden from me except when we were playing a game that we both knew we were playing. After I calmed down, I asked her, "Why did you hide from me?" Here sat a child never short of words, but she had no answer. After a long while, she said, "Because you went upstairs?" "But you must have heard me calling for you," I said. She nodded. "And you didn't come out or answer." She nodded and smiled, but seemed to understand that laughing was not a good decision. A new policy was implemented in our home. Hiding is okay when we are playing hide and seek. Hiding is not okay when you hear your mother calling for you over and over and she enters and exits every single part of the house multiple times. My daughter never said, "I learned it from watching you," but in asking her in earnest, "Why?" she had a look of confusion with a joy that she could barely stifle. I knew that look well. And if curse words were yet a part of her vocabulary, I also knew the answer that she was not permitting to pass her lips.